Hello, I'm going to be reading accounts of schizophrenia and psychosis from Appendix 2 of Joanna Moncrieff's book, The Bitterest Pills, The Troubling Story of Antipsychotic Drugs. The following three accounts are abridged versions of stories found in the National Institute for Health and Clinical Excellence's NICE Guideline on the Treatment of Schizophrenia, National Institute for Health and Clinical Excellence, 2002. Story 1. Mr. A described how he started to develop symptoms while he was at university. He was hearing voices and reading strange meanings into what was going on. He was referred to a psychiatrist, but managed to persuade the psychiatrist that there was nothing wrong, and he recovered without any intervention and went on to finish his degree. Later, in his mid-20s, while he was working as a research scientist, he started to hear voices and also to see things, and he was hospitalized after he took an overdose triggered by his distress at what was happening. He was started on an antipsychotic drug in hospital, which he describes as the start of a vicious cycle. He would be put on drugs, find it difficult to function at work, stop taking them, and end up being readmitted to hospital. Eventually, he had to give up work, and after 20 years, and despite being on antipsychotic treatment, he describes how the voices are still awful when they are really loud. They discuss me, put me down, shout obscenities, comment on what is happening to me, and tell me to do things that put me in danger. It is very difficult to remain communicating in the real world, and doing this leaves me exhausted. In addition, I often end up seeing the world in a very different and frightening way, and at the time I'm having these delusions, I really believe them. I can still get very distressed by it all, but these days, living with schizophrenia is easier than it was when I was first ill. Story 2. Mr. B developed symptoms at the age of 33 years. He felt wonderfully excited, as though I was the only person in the country to be let in on a great secret, and recounted how he spent the summer travelling around in search of more delusional excitement, and thought he had become involved in the peace process in Northern Ireland. At the end of the summer, he was admitted to hospital after an outburst in which he caused a considerable amount of damage to property. In hospital, he was prescribed an antipsychotic, which made him suicidally depressed, and he stopped taking it as soon as he was discharged. He spent the next 10 years in a cycle of gradually getting ill, which he usually enjoyed, getting arrested, being sectioned, and feeling suicidal because of the side effects of the drugs. At the time, he said his benchmark for happiness was not being medicated, and when he was psychotic, he felt positive and purposeful. Eventually, he accepted drug treatment, encouraged by a supportive relationship with a community psychiatric nurse who was willing to listen to his point of view, and he had not had an admission for 4 years at the time of writing. Story 3. Mrs. C was diagnosed with schizophrenia a few years after she was married. Her husband described how, during her psychotic episodes, she would wander the streets in a disturbed state, frequently being picked up by the police and ending up in hospital, sometimes for many months. He felt that drug treatment pacified her, but at the cost of destroying her personality and curtailing her enjoyment of life. My wife is naturally a very lively and stimulating person to be with, and seeing her pacified by the side effects of medication was heartbreaking. Eventually, his wife was prescribed a low dose of medication, which appeared to control her symptoms without too many adverse effects, and allowed her and her husband to lead as normal a life as possible despite her condition. The fourth story is taken from Bert Kaplan's book, The Inner World of Mental Illness, a collection of first-person accounts of episodes of mental disturbance published in 1964, anonymous 1964. Story 4. A middle-class professional woman who had worked as a social worker before having children described having 3 attacks of psychotic experiences in her late 30s. At the age of 36, she started having an intense affair, and in order to deal with the strength of her emotions, she started to write poetry and prose. Her writing became increasingly compulsive, and she lost interest in and neglected her children and the practical details of living. She became convinced that she had discovered the secrets of the universe and that she could prove the existence of God. She also thought there had been a world catastrophe, and she thought her children had died. She had a general sense of fear and dread, as well as some unusual religious and sexual ideas. She was taken to hospital in 1948 in a rigid catatonic condition, where she was given a barbiturate and discharged after 5 months. Her second episode occurred 1 year later, and she was admitted in much the same state for 3 months and recovered spontaneously. The third episode started in 1951, and she was in hospital on this occasion for over a year. During this episode, she developed the idea that she should kill her youngest son and some other people, although she did not act on these thoughts. She was treated with ECT twice during this admission, and up until the time that the book was compiled in the early 1960s, she had no further episodes. Looking back at the time the account was written, she felt that the experience had reduced her anxiety, helped her gain confidence, freed up her intellectual capacities, and enabled her to change from a non-religious to a religious orientation.